Hi people. Slightly different location for this one simply because my washing machine's going and it's a bit background noise. This is not actually a bad little setting, clear background, so I may use this in the future depending on. I'm actually sitting on my bed right now, so it's not really the ideal seat, but I want to talk about the post office scandal. I'm not going to add too much more to what I've said in my previous video, but I think what's happened since then just reiterates the points. And this is a very disturbing case, obviously for the miscarriage of justice that's happened, the very large scale miscarriage of justice. I mean, any one of these situations, it's a miscarriage of justice. But when you're talking about 700 plus people, that really is a national scandal. Um, And, let's just be clear what we're talking about here. We're talking about hundreds of lives ruined. In some cases, people felt so much pressure that they took their own lives. People who confessed rather than going to prison, so implicating themselves because they felt there was no other way. Um, Marriages broken down, people forced to sell their homes in order to pay for the legal bills, people castigated from the communities in some cases, um, reputations destroyed, unfairly so. I mean, the implications are just so profound and literally hundreds of lives ruined. And it's good that justice is finally coming and the scandals finally emerged, but these people would have felt alone for years. They would have felt like it would have been felt like a David and Goliath situation. They were going up against a British institution. They were going up against the powers of the state, and it's just it's just so disgraceful that this happened. Um, but one thing that's emerged from it all, there's been these inquiry hearings from investigators. Now, they come out with the excuse they were just doing their job. Technically, it may be true. Maybe they were just doing what they had to do, but I still say it's the way they went about it. On the BBC News at 6, there was one of the investigators, and he was questioned as to why he went into one of the sub postmasters' homes, looking through the person's bank balance. Um, and he said his response was, if you're asking, was I comfortable with it? No. But there was no sense of sort of remorse. There was no sense of sympathy. And the man's, I think actually he's already passed away. The man's widow was sitting there. No sense of compassion, no sense of, I feel awful about this and my heart goes out to his family. Nothing. Just, oh, I was doing my job. Don't blame me. It was just this dismissive attitude. And I think a lot of these investigators are not doing themselves any favours. Now, technically, they may be small, like far down the pecking order, but they still are not doing themselves any favours with their attitude, just their callous, dismissive attitude. And I think, frankly, some of them, if you look at if you look at the question of due process, there was an assumption of guilt. So I think there does have to be tough questions about how they went around their investigation. They say they're just doing their job. Well, how is that job conducted? Why is there not an assumption of innocence? Why is that an assumption of guilt? I think one of the most disgraceful elements of all of this is that whilst people were being interrogated and harassed, and bear in mind some of them were elderly people, um, and you could say they were vulnerable people, they were told that they were alone, that they stood out, that no one else, the technology worked for everyone else, so they were made to feel that they were at fault. I wouldn't be surprised if there was gaslighting going on, and in some cases they actually started to believe it and actually started to almost be convinced maybe they had done something wrong when they hadn't, because these unscrupulous, um, unethical investigators used those tactics. I think they behaved like thugs, quite honestly. And I think it wasn't an exaggeration in that inquiry when um, the investigator was described as behaving like a 70s mob enforcer. I mean, they can say they were just doing their job, but there is a principle of how do you go about it. You know, I think it's pretty obvious that they were looking for guilt. They were trying to, catch them out. There was an assumption of guilt, And that is the problem. If they were genuine investigators, I mean, if they were doing it in an ethical way, they would just look at everything and they would say, look, we have to ask these questions, and this is, you know, we're not saying you're guilty, but that is the problem. They were basically saying you are guilty and we're going to find you out. So they were bullying people into basically, those who basically admitted guilt. That's an awful position to be in. Admit guilt or go to prison. So it's admitting to something that they hadn't done. But that brings me to the point about. I mean, I think there's also an arrogance of power. Let's face it. Paula Venables has become sort of the I don't want to say scapegoat. I think she deserves all the heat she gets, but she's not the only one. She happens to be the head of the post office now, but this has been going on for quite a long time, well over a decade, and it's now emerging there may have even been previous technology that was flawed. So previous post office heads also have to answer to this. Ed Davey has questions to answer, the Liberal Democrat leader. Now he says that post office masters lied to him, but then it still gets down to the question, why did he not ask the right questions? Why did he just blindly believe them? It's not good enough to say, oh, well, I was lied to. It means he wasn't asking the right questions. Why did Ed Davey not push them on whether this technology was reliable or not? I mean, there's a common sense deficit because if these people were really stealing money or, in order to benefit themselves, they would have been going on expensive holidays. They would have been buying big luxury TVs and stuff. None of that happened. They, in some cases, had to sell up their homes. So it's pretty damn obvious to anyone that would have been involved in this that something wasn't right, that these people were being made scapegoats. And that brings me to the point about the technology itself. I think if this case doesn't waken people up to the fact that we cannot be over reliant on technology, I don't know what will. There's just too much of an assumption that, oh, well, it's new technology, it's high tech, it must be right. There's no questions on could there be human error here, could there be a flaw in the system, as there clearly was with Horizon. And, it's human beings that are discarded, it's human beings that are thrown under the bus. It sickens me. But I think there's a lesson in this. There's a few lessons. Firstly, there has to be due process. There has to be an assumption of innocence when people are accused of something. This is not to say that you don't ever get fraud and you won't get examples where people actually are stealing. But in this case, these people were innocent and they were scapegoated for faulty technology. I think there is definitely an establishment question. I think there is an arrogance of power. I think the people at the top of the post office, Paula Venables is, the name that is being cited, but there are others. There's just this arrogance that they are right and to hell with the little people. Um, Apparently, she was a Church of England minister. Well, I hope she's been defrocked subsequently, or I don't know what the ecclesiastical term would be, but it's an absolute disgrace. She's returned her CBE. I don't think it's enough. I think if she knew that innocent people were being implicated and the technology was faulty, and that's now emerging that there is, it seems likely that the management did in fact know that the technology was faulty. They threw people under the bus. I'm not a jurist, so I don't know what the precise charge would be, but surely that will come under perverting the course of justice. If you know that innocent people are taking the fall when it's not their fault, surely that would be. I mean, to me, that's if there's not a legal issue there, it's definitely ethically corrupt. Um, so I do hope that prosecutions follow. It shouldn't be a case of revenge, just send them all to prison, but I do think they should face the heat. They should understand what they have put these people through. And as for the bonus culture, the rotten bonus culture, that absolutely needs to be called into question. I think one good penalty might be, for example, if someone like Paula Venables has to personally pay back all her bonus money in the form of compensation to the victims. Not just her, others as well. Personally pay it back, and if she struggles, so be it. There to face the heat. Um, but that could be, that sort of financial burden on the bigwigs, the power brokers in the post office system. I think that would be a good penalty. They need to really feel pressure in their pocket. Um, and in the worst cases, if they are known to, for example, pervert the course of justice, then yeah, I think in some cases they probably should go to jail. Has to be seen to be done, and lessons have to be learnt from this. There shouldn't be over reliance on technology. Um, when so many cases are similar, then what are the chances that different postmasters in different parts of the country who don't know each other are all doing the same thing? That just doesn't make sense. I mean, if there was one or two cases, then yeah, you could maybe get a corrupt individual who's um, stealing from the system. But the fact that hundreds of people were implicated in different places all over the country shows that there was something wrong. So it's infuriating, the abuse of power that's gone on here, and the fact that so many innocent people have suffered. It's a damn disgrace. And I do think there has to be justice. There has to be, there should be no holds barred in these inquiries. They need to really put them on the spot, really ask them tough questions, and not let them worm the way out of it with, oh, I was just doing my job. No, not good enough. They have to push the question and say, well, silence is not actually, that did happen tonight. Silence isn't, sorry, that we can't accept that.